Hi, Emma.
Hello.
That's okay. You can keep chewing. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
But is he or she real behind you?
Yeah, she's really old. Her name
Oh,
is
I'm sorry.
her name is Lulu. She's 14. She
Oh,
barely
I
moves
mean, she was lying so still. I thought it was a stuffed animal.
now. No.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Cool. The Hi, Bika. Yep. So folks coming in. Good. Good. We'll get this party started. Ooh. Are you a psychology major?
Who, me?
Yeah.
Oh, no. I'm just interested in psychology, but I'm taking it for PA school.
Oh, okay. Okay. Did we have that conversation before, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, no. Yeah, I emailed you way before. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Well, I get my niece is still thinking about. She applied to North Carolina UNC for PA, but she just got a job with Duke.
Oh, that's a good school. If she gets
Yes.
into Duke, that would be awesome.
Well, actually, she got a job there. So as a clinical social worker, and now she's wondering if she wants to continue pursuing that or still going to get the BA.
I think she should still stick to her requirements, and if she ever decides to do PA, she'll have that.
Yeah, it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. I'm with you.
Yeah, agreed.
Right. So I'll connect you guys together, and you can give her some career advice.
Oh yeah, definitely.
All right.
No, I was a breast cancer navigator, so I know a little bit about working in the hospital setting.
Okay, excellent. Oh, and Kayla, by the way, my niece is Kayla that I'm talking about right now.
Oh, that's cool.
And you spell it the same way, so that's interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm teaching my niece vicariously, huh? So whatever you get automatically goes to her.
Nice.
Cool. All right, let's see. We're at 3. So let's see. We ended just before going into some more Freudian stuff. So I think the rest of the day we'll finish chapter 1 and get that taken care of. And then all of you guys will be experts in Freud. And you can then get an adjunct teaching position at Nova. All right, so let's see. Here we go. Oh, that's not the right one. Yep. Here we go. All right. So any questions on any of the stuff? If you perchance went over your notes and looked back and you had a question about before we begin on the new stuff? Yeah, okay. All right, so we'll move on into a little bit further into not only the background into some of the psychological fields, but more specifically, we'll look at the psychoanalytic and probably psychobehavioral today. And that should take us through the rest of this chapter. But as we were saying before, a lot of our development and our experiences are subject to 3 primary areas: cognitive, emotional, and biological. So because cognitive is so large, and especially from a psychological perspective, that's what we really focus on. How does thought drive behavior? How does behavior influence decisions? How do decisions lead to experiences and continuing that cycle? So even though my training is as an industrial organizational psychologist, I actually end up doing more cognitive behaviorism because organizations and individuals are more concerned with how their lives impact their surroundings, even their partners, their relationships, and even those relationships in organizations versus how the organization is functioning. And so cognitive behaviorism, as it shows here, a behavioral worldview, emphasizing that children learn by watching others and that our thoughts about the reinforces determine behavior. I would even say, and I don't know if you guys have seen this, but there was a challenge going around. Fortunately, some people went to jail, but there was a challenge going around where people were going into supermarkets and they were opening, one guy was opening a iced tea, lemon iced tea, one of those really big ones, and then he spit in it and then put the cap back on it and puts it back on the shelf. This other guy opened some, I guess, Breyer's ice cream and then licked it and stuck his finger in it, then put the cap back on top of it and put it back into the freezer. And then one young lady that was arrested decided to go into the fruits and vegetables area and urinate on the fruit. So think of that from a social learning perspective. I mean, the number of people that said the only reason they did it is because they were challenged and they saw other people doing it. And of course, because they had not gotten caught, they were thinking, oh, okay, it's just a joke. But then when the police surrounded their houses, they decided it wasn't as much a joke anymore. So cognitive behaviorism is facilitated by a couple of things. One, modeling. And as we discussed earlier, until the age of 3, we have an inability to create a conscious memory. And so if that's the case, a lot of the things that we are learning that we repeat and create a habit from is as a result of modeling. Now, part of that is called scaffolding, is one way of learning. And even though it's not on the slide, I'll share that with you as something of note. Scaffolding, if you think of it as an example, when someone is washing windows, they're on a scaffold and they finish the first floor or second floor, and then they either add to the scaffold and do the third floor, they add to the scaffold, do the fourth floor and on. Well, scaffolding is very similar in nature, that we teach someone a certain level, and then after they learn that level, create a mastery of that level, then we add another level to that. What might be something that you're familiar with where scaffolding becomes prevalent? Of course, as a learning cycle. Oh, I need to open the chat so I can see what you're saying. Or you can unmute. Any ideas? Okay. So how many of you in school started out learning how to divide? That was the first arithmetic training you had. What did you start with? Wake up, people.
Wouldn't you start with like
Addition?
Yeah,
Counting?
addition.
Subtraction.
Yep, you started with addition. And so think of scaffolding that way. So you started, and once you mastered as much as they could help you, you mastered addition, then you went to subtraction. Once you had those down, then you went to multiplication. Once you had that down, you went to division, right? So they allow you to master one area because it promotes your knowledge and capability in the next area. And so as we look at that, modeling takes on this form. The difference between modeling and scaffolding is modeling, they continue to present the skills for you and you simply duplicate those. With scaffolding, they do teach you, but then they allow you the freedom to master it on your own, with assistance, but you master it on your own. And once you've mastered that and that recognition is there, then they introduce the next level and continue. So a couple of things that I mentioned at the beginning of this chapter on last Thursday was the idea of self-concept, self-efficacy, self-confidence. So there are those areas that we'll focus on, especially as it relates to developmental psychology. The first, of course, is self-efficacy. And now, even though it has this explanation and internal belief in one's competence that predicts when children initiate activity, or whether children initiate activities or persist in the face of failures, a simple way of saying that is your capability to achieve a task. So if you're given a task, your belief that you have the capability, the knowledge and the competence to achieve or fulfill that task is your level of self-efficacy. Some people, of course, have low self-efficacy and are highly reliant on others to help them achieve tasks. And then there are others who have high self-efficacy, and subsequently, they have a level of self-confidence and in their ability, capability, and potential that make them believe, at least, or have a perspective that they can be successful in whatever tasks they're assigned. Now, oh, I almost went too far. Go back a little bit. Here we go. So Freud, again, was the father of psychoanalysis or psychoanalytic psychology. And so he had some pretty good ideas, even though, now remember, take this with a grain of salt, because Freud was back in the 1830s, and a lot of his theories were within 1830 to 1860. I think he died in 1865 or around there. But his idea was, again, that structurally, we can't read someone's mind. So since we can't read their minds, the best thing that we can do is try to figure out what their unresolved issues are, and even their desires and urges that they're unwilling to share openly. Because if we can figure those out, then at least we can make an educated guess about what's causing those thoughts and behaviors. So the first that he talked about is the personality background. So the 3 levels of personality. And Freud said it was the id, ego, and superego. The id, instincts, needs, and feelings; ego, conscious, rational part of personality; and superego, moral aspect of personality. So let's talk about those a little bit more. So first, if we look at the id, and I'm going to bring it up, because a lot of times, if you look at this through Google or any place else, what you will see is an iceberg. And of course, as with any iceberg, there is a water level. So there are things that you see above the water level, and then things that you see below. So Freud said, this is how we not only develop our personalities, but this is also how we experience our personalities. This is how we manifest our behaviors. So he said the id is this area above that represents an area that is conscious. And we'll talk about these separately, but for right now, the id is your base instinct, your primal instinct. So the id, quite simply, is the area of our brains where we look for instant gratification. So if I want something, if it's going to cause me pleasure and it's something that I really want to achieve, then I am not concerned about good or bad, right or wrong, none of those aspects of my action. The only thing I'm concerned about is, will it make me happy? And if it makes me happy, there is no second guessing, there is no thought. It simply means I do it. So I'll give you the other two, and then once I give you the other two, we'll go back and I'll give you an example of each of these. So the next area is, and I'm going to put it right on the line, is the ego. So the ego is our rational part of the brain. So the ego says either that it is good or it is bad. So the ego actually will fight with the id, because the id says, I don't care if it's good or bad. I just want it. It makes me happy. The ego says, well, hold on a minute. You may want it, but there are repercussions to your wanting that and how you plan to achieve it. And those repercussions can be costly. And if they are, you might want to think about this before you do it. So the ego is sort of this placeholder between the id and the third part, which is the superego. Now, simply because I'm writing the superego down here at the base doesn't mean that's where it goes. It simply means that I'm separating the two. So I'm separating the id from superego. The superego is both rational and moral. It's moral, it's ethical, it aligns itself with your beliefs. So if your parents taught you, that it's wrong to judge people without knowing them, then that becomes a part of your ethical behavior. And so you will align yourself with people who don't make blatant judgments about others. You also may look at it whether it is right or wrong. That's again, if you're spiritual or you're philosophical, is it right or is it wrong? So now, the superego will also argue with the ego, and it will argue with the id, because the id says, I don't care about the results or the repercussions. I simply want to do it. Superego says, wait a minute, but that's not how you were taught. That's not what you believe. That's not morally or ethically right. So don't do it. Think about it. The id sometimes will slap superego in the face and say, I don't, get out of my way. I'm going to do whatever I want to do. Well, the ego may say, this is going to make me feel good, and I think it's the right thing to do, even though it's for the wrong reason. And the superego says, well, wait a minute, if it's the wrong reason, don't do it. So that's the idea. So let's get back and use an example. So this would be probably better if we were at Annandale, but for those of you that have gone to Annandale, once you cross 495, there's a 7-Eleven over there. Oop, I put 7 up. Oops, 7-Eleven. So there's a 7-Eleven over there. And let's say that for 2 days, you have had nothing to eat. You're absolutely hungry. And so the id would say, after you finish class, go over to the 7-Eleven. You have no money, right? But they've got a Snickers bar, and that will fill you up. Now, the id would say, don't worry about anything other than satisfying your hunger. Take the Snickers bar. The ego would say, look, I know you're hungry, but if you take it without paying for it, you could get arrested. You could get barred from the store. People could see you and your name be tainted. So the ego says, let's think about the value of taking that Snickers bar. Is it good? Is the outcome going to be good, or can it be bad? Now, you may still take the Snickers bar, but at least you rationalize it and thought about it. The superego would say, well, hold on, because it's wrong to steal. You were taught not to take something that's not yours, right? So now it's not about good or bad. It's about right or wrong. And so that's why these conflict with each other. But Freud says we each have these 3 areas of our personality which sort of force us into the thought process if it's ego or superego. But if it's the id, then it's basal instinct, it's primal. Just do it and don't worry about the implications or repercussions. Now, what goes along with those, and again, it's not necessarily, well, it's not on the slides, but it also lends itself to other areas that we are responsible for, and that is the conscious, preconscious, and subconscious. Or I'm going to put, because if you look at it in the book, it's going to be unconscious. All right. So those three areas. So even if I look at the iceberg, which fits more with this, the conscious is what we allow others to be aware of. So when we do something consciously, right, even if we think about the id, ego, or superego, there is a conscious awareness of what I'm doing because I know I'm going to take the Snickers bar. But I'm not concerned if it's aligned with the id. But I still have this precept that someone is going to be aware. And since I'm doing it overtly, someone could be aware of my stealing that Snickers bar. So the conscious is what we say verbally or what we show behaviorally that allow others to either make considerations or judgments of us. The preconscious is the composition of knowledge and experience. So, and I'm going to draw this here because the preconscious becomes the gatekeeper for us showing or us hiding. Because the preconscious is where we house our knowledge and experiences. So if we use those, we may decide that, you know, based on my experience with this before, it did not end well if I told someone or said what I was planning to say. So in that particular instance, I may hold that information in the unconscious and not share it with someone else. However, I may say, you know what, I know it's not going to be good, but I need to tell them the truth. And then the preconscious says it's okay and gives permission to the conscious. The subconscious is the area, according to Freud, where we still maintain our unresolved conflicts, hidden urges, desires, those kind of things. So if the unconscious, and there are things there that we don't, that the preconscious says, no, 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 don't tell anybody this, you got to hold this. As an example, someone who is a pedophile, they have hidden urges and desires that they know if those are unveiled, that there are serious repercussions and implications, as there should be. But there are serious implications and repercussions for that particular urge or desire. So the preconscious, in many instances, says, no, don't reveal that. So it puts the gate up and says, no, you keep those desires hidden. You don't disclose those. Now, for some people who said the only way that I can manage this is by joining a group and revealing these so they can help me figure out how to deal with them, then the preconscious says, you know what, based on the experience of what I know about these groups, if they're successful, yeah, I'll open both gates and you can use the conscious to reveal that and talk about it. So that's where Freud links in the id, ego, and superego with the conscious, preconscious, and subconscious. Okay, any questions?
No.
Okay. All right, so let's go back to Freud.
Professor, so the id, is that from your drawing, is that considered conscious, part of the conscience?
The id is both conscious and unconscious,
Okay.
right? Because our desires, even though we are going to manifest those into a behavior, it first happens through thought. I'm hungry, so I want that Snickers bar. I may not tell anybody that, but I know it internally. And then I manifest it externally, which is conscious because now I'm sharing that or making it available for others to see. Yeah, so the id, the ego, and the superego, along with the conscious, preconscious, and subconscious, it's not one size fits all.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah. Success rate attract. Yes, Kyle. If there is trust, one, then people will join groups because sometimes knowing that you are not the only person who's experiencing those particular urges or desires, and other people might be able to share how they have managed to repress them and or deal with them. So the groups tend to have good success rate, but of course the first person has to trust that their issues are going to remain their issues and only within the group. And then the other side of that are the people that you're going to be associated with. Are they there just to get information, or are they there really to help by sharing their stories? But so far, these groups tend to be successful in nature. All right. So Freud also says, well, look, those are genetic. Our id, ego, superego first start as genetics, and then as a result of our environment, we developed these the rules that we associate with these things. But he also says that from a psychosexual perspective, that these three areas, and I'm going to give you all five, but these three are the ones that he says are primary in distinguishing our root cause for unresolved conflict and or urges or desires that we hold in the unconscious. The first is oral. So Freud, not unlike Piaget, says that the very first experiences that a child has are as a result of his or her senses. And one of the primary senses that satisfy existence is food, water, blah, blah. But he says because a child does not have the ability to make decisions, does not have conscious memories, they're completely dependent on an external environment. And so most of their needs are satisfied orally, right? Food and water, even air. So Freud says the first stage of development is the oral stage. Now, that what he also says is if we are successful through that stage, then we move on to the next stage and continue to develop successfully. However, if we don't get beyond that stage, then it becomes a stage of fixation. So we can have an oral fixation, we can have an anal fixation. Now, phallic is not applied there, but from an oral perspective, let's say that if you are a child and that child is hungry and his or her hunger is ignored. Usually the response for a child who is hungry is to cry and or to scream or to do whatever because they want what they want. So Freud says if they are unsuccessful in this stage, then even as an adult, one of their first responses is going to be an oral response. So it may be one of anger, where people immediately, when they don't get their way, they scream, they yell. For some people, an oral fixation is that they have to have the last word. And so no matter what happens, they've got to have the last word before they stop. And so those fixations, because they were not satisfied as a baby, then they tend to manifest themselves as a teenager and as an adult. So Freud says, however, if the oral stage, if a child is satisfied, if his or her needs are satisfied, then they can move from the stage of dependency, oral being a stage of dependency, to a stage of independent dependency. So I know that sounds crazy, but what do we tend to do with children around the age of 1.5 to 2 years old? What's one of the primary things we do?
Potty train.
We potty train, yes. So even though there's still a level of dependence on the parents, on the caregiver, we're teaching the child how to be independent. Because if you think about it, even on the commercials, oh, you're a big boy now, you're a big girl now. That's what big kids do. You know, they go to the potty, they clean themselves, they do whatever it is. So we're actually structuring through that training, through that modeling, behaviors that will allow the child to develop a level of independence. And the reason I say independence dependence is because there's still a need for the caregiver's security and satisfaction of certain needs. Now let's look at the bad side of the anal stage. If there's a fixation stage, let's use two scenarios. In one, you have a child who is taught to use the potty or is being trained to use the potty, but if he or she makes a mistake and they don't get there in time, or they, you know, mess up their diapers or whatever, if you have a caregiver who is highly authoritarian, then he or she may find that there is a high level of guilt and shame associated with that level of independence. There are repercussions if you don't live up to what other people expect. And so for that person, they could, and this is not the only reason, but they could become obsessive compulsive. Because they're afraid of the results of something not being clean, even their diapers, they develop this need, obsessive compulsion, for cleanliness. Everything has to be in order. Everything has to be clean. Everything has to be put in its place. The other side of that is, if a child does, not fare well with learning how to potty train, and they are ignored by the caregiver, so they end up in their messed up diaper in an environment that is unclean. And if that becomes cognitively the norm, then that person could lead that person toward becoming a hoarder. And for them, disarray is the norm. Cleanliness is a waste of time because that's not how they were taught. So again, those kind of things can become fixations. And so then an adolescent or an adult, for some, you can look in their cars. And it's not always evident because some people just work so much they live in their car. But you can look in some cars and it looks like the back of the 7-Eleven where everything is just thrown and nothing's in place. And you go to another person's car and look like you can eat eggs off of the seat. Right? So Freud says all of that is part of, well, not all of it, but a large part of that is as a result of developmental issues established in some of the first phases of sexuality and development. And let me answer the question. If a child has issues with that stage, they remember it. Now, and when I say memory, remember that with Dr. Lipton, prior to the age of 3, you don't have a conscious memory. So it's not a conscious memory that you have of that fixation. It is a subconscious memory. So now, because it's subconscious, people live in disarray or extreme cleanliness as a result of something that they really didn't have control over. It was conditioned because of the external environment. And then those who aren't fixated, tend to have some semblance of cleanliness, but also some semblance of disarray, but not extreme. Did that answer it, Emma?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. So the phallic stage Now again, in 1930s, the phallic stage, gender was purely male, female. There was no LBGTQ. It was male, female, period. And so from Freud's time in history, the phallic stage was the definition or the defining stage of being male or female. What do boys do? What do girls do? What's the construct of their physical bodies that associate one gender with power and authority and the other with subservience and a considered weakness? So because the only thing, and even now, if you take on average, if you take a 5 or 6 year old child, male or female, there's no distinguishing difference between them other than their physical presence of either a penis or a clitoris. That's it. From the waist up, they look the same. So Freud said, we define this area of maleness or femaleness by the physical presence of one of those extremities. And then secondly, we associate power and strength and authority with males and the absence of that with females, which also, again, don't kill the messenger, but Freud coined it as penis envy for females. Because he said if a woman wanted to be powerful, if she wanted to have strength, then she was envious because the thing that represented strength and power was a penis. And if you look at the Washington Monument and most things that are representative of men over history, it is some form of projectile. Let me see. Before I go further, let me ask you, what about children who experience some sort of trauma when they're too young to remember to express parental? Yeah, but they're repressed. Those memories prior to the age of 3 and sometimes prior to the age of 4, those memories are repressed. So let me give you this example. Let's see. How many of you have brothers and sisters? You can just raise your hand. I can see you. Okay. All right. So now, second question. What is the most painful experience a woman will ever go through in her life if she chooses to go through it?
Natural childbirth.
Childbirth. Yes, natural childbirth. The most excruciating pain that a woman might experience, external to some traumas, but that's the most natural pain that a woman will experience in her life. But you have a brother and sister. So that means your mom chose to go through it again, even though it's the most excruciating pain that she could experience. And that's because the brain takes certain memories and represses them and literally disallows them to be relived. So that's the answer. A child under the age of 4 generally will repress those memories and they don't surface again unless something significant happens later on that reconditions them or repurposes it. So that's the answer there. Okay, so back to the phallic stage. So there were 2 things that Freud said existed. There was either the Oedipus complex or the Electra complex. The Oedipus complex, because for young men, who is the greatest woman on earth? That's right, Mama. And since she is the greatest woman that could exist, well, here is this dude over here that's taking her attention away from me. It's Dad. So the Oedipus complex said that boys were envious and sometimes jealous of their fathers because the fathers took attention away from their mothers. And a child wants all that attention. That was the Oedipus complex. The Electra complex was the opposite. Young girls were jealous or angry with their mothers because they wanted all of their father's attention, but because mom was there, she was taking attention away from her, taking dad's attention away from her. So Freud says during the phallic stage, all of this stuff surfaces, but it also helped create what this association is for a male versus a female. Okay. Now, the other 2 stages that I'll just add in, after the phallic stage, there is the genital stage, and the genitals. Oh, wait a minute. Oral, anal, phallic. No, I'm sorry. There's the latent. The latent stage. Latent stage has no fixation period. So those who are in the latent stage don't go through a fixation period. There is no fixation. Generally, what happens during the latent stage is simply this idea of boy-girl. It becomes reinforced that boys do crazy stuff like jumping off of trees, and girls do stuff like cook. Now, again, that was back in the 1930s, so stop giving me those looks. Okay, so now after the latent stage, there's the genital stage. And the genital stage now tends to align with the stage of puberty. So now chemically, women or young girls become women and young boys become men because they have the ability to father a child and or to create a child. So the genital stage changes the nature of the relationships between the genders, okay? And it expands itself even further because now with the recognition that it's not just a dichotomous state of male-female, but it could be LGBTQ as a part of gender specifications as well. The largest issue that Freud recognized, or not Freud, but those after Freud, was in the latent stage because that defined what a boy was supposed to do, girl was supposed to be. Well, if you were part of the LGBTQ community, that of course was not overtly known about back in Freud's day, then that's where role confusion came in. Because I've got this boy's body, but I feel like a girl. I've got this girl's body, but I feel like a boy. So during the latent stage, role confusion really happened. And that's where a lot of mental processes became highly negative. And to some extent, the reason why a number of people committed suicide and or isolated themselves because they absolutely didn't feel like they fit in. Fortunately, we're past that now. Typically 3 to 6 years, my notes from a previous site class. Yeah, so that's fine. Because the and I would add, oh, wait a minute. Hold up, I'm sorry. Bex, are you talking about the latent stage or are you talking about the phallic stage?
I was referring to the phallic stage. I think that's when you said the Electra complex and the Oedipus complex first arise.
Yeah, well, that's when we establish gender. And yeah, that's also when we have a natural predilection toward mom or dad, dependent on our sex.
Now, do we understand at that age, do we understand sexes and genders? Do we know that one's woman, one's man? Or is it more? Oh, okay.
Yeah, because you know physically the difference.
Yeah, physically.
Yeah, but that's the only thing you know. I mean, it's not sex as in the genital stage. This is sex simply as gender. And well, think about this. If you go to a little Montessori or go to a kindergarten or something right now, the girls will be sitting with the girls, the boys will be sitting with the boys. And if the teacher says, oh, I want some of the girls to let some of the boys play with them, ew, no, right? So there's this intuitive nature about the difference between boys and girls. Once you get to the genital stage, now it becomes biological and chemical as well. Okay.
Got it. So if my father was more of the nurturer rather than my mother, would there be like more of an Oedipus complex maybe towards my father? I'd be more angry at my mother or something. Kind of.
No, not. It's not about nurturing. This at that stage, it's simply about gender. We have what Carl Jung would call. We have historical reference to what mother means and what father means. And in the absence yet, in 3 to 6 years, we don't have the experiences to really define that for ourselves. And so if we call someone mom, there is this universal thought of what mother means versus father. The separation of that doesn't come until later, like in the phallic stage, because then you start to recognize the aspects of nurturing and experience versus just gender.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So, and I don't know if you read it, but Oedipus by Shakespeare. That's where a lot of this came from, because Oedipus unknowingly killed his father and married his mother. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
His father got I guess he got a premonition or something that his son was going to kill him, and so he was trying to prevent that, but in doing so, he
Yeah.
killed the prophecy.
Yeah. He exiled him effectively, sent him away to live with other people, actually with caregivers, and then Oedipus was coming back, and on the road they got into an argument, and he killed him, not knowing that it was his father.
Yeah.
But he killed him, and then of course he goes back, takes over as king, and because he didn't know that was his father, he also didn't know that the wife of the guy he killed just happened to be his mother, that they kicked him out when he was a baby. Yeah, so that's a whole nother chapter. But but yeah, that's where the complex tends to originate and or be associated with. All right, so that's Freud. So now, just as before, and this is Dr. Horney. Dr. Horney, even though she's not here yet, we'll talk about her later, but she says, look, a lot of our development is as a result of the relationship we have with our parents. And so the guy or the person who coined that and put it down formally was Bowlby. Bowlby talked about attachment in 3 different ways. One was attachment simply child to parent. One was attachment emotionally, as in relationships. And one was attachment not so much to the way that parents parented, but simply the connection. And so here the attachment focus on nurture, nature, and love. Remember, nurture is our experiences, our environment and culture. Nature is our genetic predisposition. And then love is an emotional state that gets added onto those. So it says here, centered on crucial importance to our species survival of being closely connected with a caregiver during early childhood. Well, because it provides not only warmth and connection, but it also provides security and existence. Because at that age, at the age 0 from birth to about 2, the child is almost solely dependent on his or her existence by those who take care of him or her. So Bowlby said, if the nature part of this is our connections are innate, even to the point that there's imprinting. And because that is supported through research, if you think that, for those of you who maybe experienced this, or if you have seen it even on television, after a child is born and they very quickly take the child, clean up what they can, they put the child back in the mother's arms if there's no medical issues. There is an imprinting that is happening, and there's an imprint that has happened while the child was in the womb. I mean, the mother's heartbeat, the pulse, all of those things are memories, genetic memories that child has. And if you also note that a child who is with their caregiver that they've established an attachment connection with, if someone comes external and tries to hold the child, they will pull away because they haven't established that relationship. So again, Bowlby says we're genetically programmed, and then from the nurture side, it's reinforced by those who take care of us, caregivers. All right, so now evolution. We could spend 2 weeks on this one, but I'm going to try to make it short, because the idea of evolution is both nature and nurture, right? For some, the protection of the species and identifying those kind of things that will make those persons secure, even our lineage. You know, we will do certain things to promote their behavior, their knowledge, their existence that we may not do for others. And what is really extreme for this, if you watch any of the Animal Planet things, the lion and the pride, the lion takes ownership of the pride. So the female lions in any of the offspring that he has fathered. If that lion is killed and a new lion comes in, that lion will kill all of the male offspring from that pride because they're not of his lineage. And the lion is not the only one to do that. But the idea from evolutionary psychology is simply that there are certain behaviors that are exhibited to promote the existence of our own lineage and our own species. And what happens in different cultures, different groups, all of those things. It's interesting that if you watch the 300, the Spartans, and it was documented that the Spartans and some of the Greeks, if a child was born deformed at birth, then the child was killed because he diminished their society by taking or having a need that detracted from what they considered to be the social order. Now, here's where we get into it even further, because now, as we talked about last time, this idea of fraternal or identical twins. Now, the studies that we'll talk about, and that's the video that we'll watch toward the end of the class. But the idea was you have a gene or in an egg that normally when it duplicates and replicates itself, it is simply creating the genetic structure, the DNA blueprint for creating that person. But in this particular instance, the cell splits, but it cell splits as a complete entity. And even though it's within the same sac, then you have two identical cells that are now duplicating to create two individuals that are identical. And then fraternal side generally is because it's a boy and a girl, they're in two separate sacs, but it's one of the very few times that two eggs are fertilized where you get a set of twins, even though they are fraternal. They are not identical. Now, the question was, from a developmental perspective, what happens with identical twins that are separated early in life? What happens to those that are raised together? And what happens to fraternal twins who are separated early and are raised together? And is there a significant difference between their development, both cognitively and in a lot of instances socially? And what they found is that there is for twins who are separated early, they have a lot of the similarities in thought, but their behaviors, because of the cultures that they grow up in, if the cultures are different, then it can cause a change in their behaviors, even though a lot of their cognitive behavior or not cognitive characteristics are still very similar. And through many studies, they found that a lot of them have gone down similar paths, even though they were separated from each other. So that's strong. Fraternal twins, probably 60%, where identical twins are more like 80%. And then, of course, if they are raised by biological parents, the difference is that identical twins, because they are identical, they tend to be treated the same. And fraternal twins, because it's a boy and a girl, they tend to be treated differently, and not meaning that one is bad, one is good. It is simply that the nature of trying to raise a boy versus raising a girl and having those differences. I mean, my kids are twins, and I have fraternal twins, a boy and a girl. And my daughter used to ask me, she said, well, Dad, do you love your son or my brother more than me? And I was like, absolutely not. I love you both the same. However, I understand boys. I don't understand girls. Your mom is great, but she still drives me crazy because there are some things that I just don't understand about girlness that she understands and appreciates. But on the boy side, hey, I'm good. I can work with that. So you think about it, even from a natural perspective, biological parents, there's still this uncertainty because now you're dealing not with two people who look exactly the same, but those not only who may not look the same, but have different genders. So the studies were done to see how much of an impact, developmental impact, and we'll look at that a little bit later. All right. So now we'll finish this part. Let me see, before we go into, Erickson, we'll watch the video. So principle one, our nature, again, genetic, the biology of who we are, shapes our nurture, right? So our genetic tendencies tend to make us more susceptible to environmental or cultural changes. So there are evocative forces, which mean there are those things that are within us that evoke certain behaviors, certain reactions, certain responses. And then there are other active forces that are external, cultural, sociological, that also influence our responses and our behaviors. And then principle two is more of a caregiver perspective, in that our experiences are either going to advance the status of our genetic abilities, or it's going to inhibit those and diminish them. And that's why it's called a person-environment fit. You know, is the child in the environment where he or she is nurtured, and so they become more advanced in their thinking and their experiences, or are they in an environment where they are disallowed that experience? Now, because we know that at least before the age of 12, if a child is isolated from other children, from an environment and culture of experiences, the prefrontal cortex, their ability to think, is severely diminished. So now think of countries where women are disallowed to go to school, or even some men, because the nature of needing to work, and so they are relegated to certain experiences, and so they don't have this world view where they can recognize differences in capabilities. I mean, I've seen some of my friends who are either Middle Eastern and or from a country, an African country, that have come over and made their lives here in the US, who have expanded their horizons significantly because the same barriers that may have existed before no longer exist. Now, that being said, the opposite is also true. For some of those countries, whether they are European, Asian, African, it doesn't matter, but in those environments, there is a prescribed and an accepted nature of things, culture of things, that when you introduce other experiences, it becomes more negative. I still have an appreciation for and I will say the nature of many African cultures that still appreciate nature. And even the idea that you only take what you need, where there are other cultures that take whatever's available, whether they need it or not. So again, the person-environment fit depends on the culture, the environment, and what you're trying to achieve from that state. Okay, so now with that, let's look at the twin study, and then we'll go into Erickson. Any questions so far, guys? Guys being universal. I don't want to be a long one, so I'm going to get one that's only about 10 minutes long. Yeah, here we go.
Important in the behavioral and social sciences, but are also important in the health sciences as well, are twin studies and adoption studies. And these studies are important because they can help researchers tease apart nature, our genes, our genetic code, and nurture our environment. So they can help us figure out what things we inherit from our parents and what comes about through our interaction with our environment, where we live, our surroundings, our parents, our peers. So let's start off by talking about twin studies. And there are two types of twins: monozygotic twins, who are also known as identical twins, and dizygotic or fraternal twins. Monozygotic twins develop from a single fertilized egg. And I'll underline mono here because that means one. So we have one egg and we have one sperm, and they come together, the sperm fertilizes the egg, and then the egg splits into two. And because the egg splits after fertilization has occurred, monozygotic twins are genetically identical to each other. They share 100% of their genes. So identical twins don't just look the same, they have the same genetic code in every cell. Fraternal or dizygotic twins develop from two separate fertilized eggs. And here I'll underline di, which indicates two. So instead of one egg being released during a woman's cycle, two are released instead. And these two different eggs are fertilized by two different sperm. And as a result of this, fraternal twins share 50% of their genes. So fraternal twins have the same genetic relatedness as regular siblings. And just like you and your siblings, they might look alike, but they aren't going to be identical. But unlike regular siblings, both identical and fraternal twins are unique in that they share the same environment. First off, they share the same prenatal environment. They're exposed to the same things while they're in the womb. But twins are also raised by the same parents at the same time. They eat the same food and share the same toys and the same germs. And so we say that both identical and fraternal twins can be said to share 100% of the same environment, or at least as close as two people could possibly get. But what about regular siblings? Don't they share an environment? Sure they do. And it can be kind of hard to assess how similar their environments are, but it certainly isn't 100%. And you might think, no, that doesn't really sound right. Siblings are raised by the same parents. How different could their environments really be? And on the one hand, you're totally right. Siblings definitely have a more similar environment than they would with some random person on the street. But the environments of siblings can actually vary quite a bit. So, for example, I have a younger sister, and I think my parents were way less strict with her than they were with me. I mean, I was their first kid. They didn't really know what they were doing. But they were much more prepared when she came around, and so they were much more relaxed. Also, my sister and I grew up in different places. I grew up in an apartment, but by the time my sister was born, we had already moved into a house. And while we may have gone to the same schools, we had different teachers and different friends. So while we certainly shared a similar environment, it is not as similar as we would see with twins. So let's say that you're a scientist and you're very interested in learning about what causes schizophrenia. Is it genes or is it something in the environment? Maybe a toxin that people with this disorder were exposed to in childhood. And one thing that you might have noticed in your past research is that children are more likely to develop schizophrenia if one of their parents has the disorder. And you might take that as an indication that there's a genetic component. And certainly there might be. But one problem with drawing this conclusion is that we're not sure about the effects of the environment. It's entirely possible that both parents and child develop schizophrenia, not because of any genetic component, but because there's some kind of chemical in their environment, maybe something in the water, that's actually triggering this disorder. And so what researchers want to do is to try to isolate genes and the environment, to try to look at one without the other, to see whether or not that will give us a clearer picture of what causes this disorder. And one of the ways that we can do this is with twin studies. So we could look at the rates of schizophrenia in both identical twins and fraternal twins. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to examine the effect of genes while the environment is held constant. So as we said, identical twins have 100% of the same genes, and fraternal twins have 50% of the same genes, and they both share 100% of the same environment. So these two identical twins grew up in the same time in the same place, and these two fraternal twins grew up in the same time in the same place as well. So in this study, if schizophrenia was primarily caused by genes, you would expect to see different rates of the disorder in identical and fraternal twins. You would see that if one of these identical twins had schizophrenia, there would be a higher chance that the second twin would have it as well, at least higher than you would see in fraternal twins or regular siblings. However, if schizophrenia was more of a factor of what environment someone had been exposed to, we would expect to see similar rates of the disorder in both sets of twins, because it is likely that each set of twins was exposed to the same environmental effects. So if something within that environment caused the disorder, both sets of twins would have interacted with it. It wouldn't make a difference whether or not they were identical or fraternal. So to review, if identical twins, who share 100% of the same genetic material, resemble each other more than fraternal twins, who share 50% of their genetic material, then we would conclude that that trait or disorder or behavior had a strong genetic component. However, just like with every study methodology, there are some problems with twin studies. For example, it's possible that identical twins are treated more similarly than fraternal twins are, and this could have some kind of unexpected effect. And so even though both identical and fraternal twins share more of their environment than regular siblings, it is possible that identical twins share even more of the same environment than fraternal twins do. Another type of study that can help us tease apart nature and nurture are adoption studies. In these studies, individuals who have been adopted are compared to their adopted families and their biological families. So sticking with our schizophrenia example, if rates of schizophrenia in adopted individuals resemble the rates seen in their biological family but not their adopted one, then we would conclude that there is a strong genetic component. But if we find that there is no relation between an individual and their biological parents, but that there are similar rates for adopted children and their adopted parents, then we would conclude that environment plays an important role. So because adopted individuals are exposed to different environments from their biological relatives, their genetic relatives, it makes it easier for scientists to tease apart genetic and environmental effects. But there are problems with this methodology as well. Because a child has been adopted, we might have incomplete information about their biological families. Also, placement for adoption is not random. Children are not just randomly handed to any member of the population. And some agencies might even try to match individuals with an adopted family that is similar to their biological family, in terms of community and culture. And this can make it more difficult for us to determine whether or not something is genetically driven or environmentally driven. So we have twin studies and we have adoption studies, but it's also possible for these two types of studies to be combined. In some very rare cases, identical twins are put up for adoption and they're each adopted by different families. So we have two people who are genetically identical, but they are being raised in different environments. And you can see why this would really be an ideal situation for scientists in terms of studying the underlying effects of nature and nurture. Using our schizophrenia example, if it was primarily caused by genes, if it had a strong genetic component, you would expect to see similar rates of the disorder in both identical twins raised apart and identical twins raised together. But if it was mainly driven by the environment, you would not expect to see the same rates within these two twin populations. But once again, we have the problem that adoption isn't random. In fact, families that adopt tend to be very similar to one another. They tend to be wealthy because adoption is very expensive, but they also clearly want a child, and they're really going out of their way to get one. And this might result in these families having similar parenting styles. And so even though these two identical twins might be raised by different families, their environments might not be as different as researchers would like. So to review, if something has a strong genetic component, whether it's a behavior or a trait or disorder, we would expect to see more similarity between identical twins than fraternal twins. We would expect to see no difference between identical twins raised together and identical twins raised apart. And adopted children would have more similarities to their biological families than their adopted families. But if something is environmentally driven, then we would expect to see no differences between identical twins and fraternal twins. We would also expect to see closer rates in identical twins raised together, closer than we would see in identical twins raised apart.
Okay. Sorry. Again, the value of whether twins or you can see it still fits with our nature nurture definitions and whether or not there's an impact. Now, one of the things that was written up there, and Emma, you're right, that now from an epigenetic perspective, and actually I think that was the next thing we were going to look at, but from an epigenetic perspective, remember that stem cells are as a result of conception and the cell duplication, stem cells are non-committed. So they are uncommitted cells that have not been defined yet to be a particular part of the body, whether it's going to be bone, hair, skin, whatever it's going to be. And so epigenetics effectively says that the chemical stimulation of a particular cell will help to determine the outcome associated with that cell or with that DNA. So you're right, if a pregnant woman underwent a lot of stress during pregnancy, then that stress is also a part of the blueprint structure. And so a child can be born, just like a child can be born a heroin addict or cocaine addict or crack addict or even an alcoholic. Those same stress events can cause problems for the child while he or she is in the womb. Let's see, even if the environment helps shape you and who you think you're, does not depend on. No, not fully, because you can be predisposed to high blood pressure because your parents had high blood pressure. But if you recognize that that exists and you change the nature of your environment, where you're exercising, eating healthy, doing those kind of things, you can limit the ability or the probability of that gene signature to manifest itself, and you may never get high blood pressure. So it can be, but it's not a given in either case. All
I
right.
was thinking, Professor, with that question, I was thinking of like a sphere of like possibilities based off of your genes, like how far you could prevent maybe that high blood pressure example that you were using.
Uh-huh.
There might be a limit to how much you might be able to prevent that or stave off that high blood pressure based on your genes.
Well, the genetic signature would simply would identify that characteristic exists. But remember, as with other things, the genes in your DNA, certain signatures are turned on and some are turned off, which is why blue hair versus blonde hair versus black hair versus whatever.
Yeah.
And so once you recognize the gene signature, which can be done now, you can theoretically be given the right medical advice that almost completely, and nothing is perfect, but almost completely eliminates the possibility of a natural blood pressure spike or even heart disease. But again, nothing is 100% because they can give you all the medical advice, but some things you may be doing they're not aware of. So
Yeah.
we are sometimes our own best enemies. But yeah, I think there is an extent to where we can go and change the nature of things but I think that's the limit on our knowledge for around medicine and biology, not necessarily the human genome, because it is still absolutely amazing.
Yeah, because I was gonna say it's depressing to think that like it's just your genes and that's all.
Yeah, no, it isn't. It absolutely isn't, and that's what Lipton was talking about. That our epigenetics is simply the nature of our signatures associated with stem cells once they are programmed, and then knowing the nature of those, how we can change those by changing our lifestyles and our behaviors. Yeah, so cool. Okay, so moving into Erickson, and we won't get deep into Erickson, but we will talk about these things, and I'll talk about them briefly. And then on Wednesday, is today Monday? Okay, good.
Yep.
All right, then on Wednesday, we'll cover them in more depth. So I will offer to you, I am not concerned if you remember these. Kayla, is that a question or you just? Oh, okay. No, that's okay.
Sorry, my cat's being annoying.
Oh, that's okay. And remember, I'm behavioral, so if I see a hand go somewhere, I'm thinking there's something behind it. All right, so yeah, I'm not concerned about the left side of this. So whether you remember or recognize the age differences, not so much. What I am more interested in, which we will talk about in depth, is on the right side, the tasks associated with those. So just briefly, without going much further into them until on Wednesday, this basic trust versus mistrust. When you look at, again, birth to 1 year, but the idea there is a almost complete level of dependency on the caregiver. And so if my needs are satisfied, as Maslow would say, my food, water, clothing, shelter, sex, if that is satisfied during that period, then I will more than likely cognitively associate that people care, that I can have security, that I can have well-being, so I build a level of trust. But in the absence of those things, then I believe that I have less of a connection and attachment to other people, and I'm sort of on my own. And without even looking at the others, if we develop this at an early age, it can also affect our ability to have long-lasting relationships. Because if I don't trust people, and I think they're just out to get for themselves and not to take care of me, then I may withhold information. I might be less willing to trust them with certain pieces of information, to disclose certain things about me, because I don't know if it's going to get away. And so this becomes a developmental issue as well as we go through. Now, everything with Erickson, everything on the left tends to build into itself, and everything on the right tends to build into itself. So someone with trust tends to take a level of independence, autonomy, and believe that they have the capability of being independent with still the security of caregivers. But you will see a child who has a high level of trust with his or her caregivers will try things. They'll try to walk sooner. They will pick up things. They'll stick their finger in a socket. They will do anything that gives them a sense of independence, because they know that if they go too far, there's someone there to pull them back. But if that's the case, it also shows them that there is trust in their learning, that they're given the freedom to be independent and to try things. So someone who also believes that they have the freedom to learn and develop independence will also take initiatives. They'll try different things. They won't be stuck with just looking for permission and needing approval before they try something. They tend to be more creative. And the more creative they are, the more they learn about their capabilities, abilities, and potential. And subsequently, they become more industrious. They take those and manifest them into things that are greater than even maybe they're capable of. They're willing to try and to take risks. And once they take risks, they develop a sense of independence, a sense of self-confidence, a sense of awareness. And that promotes them understanding their role in life. I mean, you see some people who are very confident in what they pursue and how they pursue in their relationships, even in their careers. And it's because of the security of these previous 4 stages: trust, autonomy, initiative, and industry. And having an identity also promotes relationships, because as the old saying goes, you can't love someone else without loving yourself. Well, someone who has a strong identity and they're confident in themselves, that creates an appreciation for themselves. So now they understand what they're bringing to the table when they're interacting with someone else. And last but not least, because of that identity, it creates long-lasting relationships, stronger relationships, truer relationships. And there isn't this belief that they can't share in someone else's grief or pain or even sadness, and that takes away from them. And I will say this, and I will end here, that relationships are about the sharing of happiness and grief. But to the extent that that person's grief does not diminish me, it actually strengthens me. And if that other person shares the same with you, then that is the chemistry, that is the formula for not only strong, but long-lasting relationships. So, and there are 2 more, because there are actually 8. 2, 4, 6. No, there are 2 more. But we will stop here for today. I'll talk about the others on Wednesday, and we'll also then move a little bit away from Erickson. I'll cover the right side of the screen, and then we'll move into some of the other developmental psychologists and their theories around development at an early age. So any questions, guys, before we close it up for today?
I have a question, but it does
Yeah.
not pertain to the lesson today.
Okay, so for those who don't have a question for today, please feel free to abscond, and I will see you on Wednesday. And for those who have a question, whether it relates to the class or not, please stay on, and we'll talk one-on-one.
Thank you, Professor.
You're more than welcome. Take care. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, Isabella?
So just like to clarify, on Monday, it's Labor Day. Do we have class?
Oh, no, we don't.
Okay. And then
And
we
that's
have
in the syllabus as well.
yeah, I just
so-
wanted to make sure. And then
Yeah.
not this Thursday, but the Thursday next week, we have our first assignment due. Will you be going over that in class before we begin it?
I can. If you remind me on Wednesday, I'll be happy to talk more about it and what I'm looking for.
Okay, perfect. That'd be great.
Okay, you got it.
All right. Thank you, Professor. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
So I have a question about the textbook.
Yes, ma'am.
So I know that people were saying that the 3rd edition is like online and we can find it online.
Uh-huh.
Can we use the 3rd edition or should we get the 4th edition?
You can use the 3rd. The 3rd, it's a nuanced change between the 3rd and the 4th, but it's not so significant that it would impact, the class or your understanding of the class. So
Okay,
yeah, so
awesome.
yeah, the 3rd should be fine. And if there are any particular nuance differences, I'll make sure that we cover them in class so that you're aware of them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, cool. Rochelle. Oh, she just left me. Madison, you're good?
Yeah,
Okay, all right. Have a good day.
thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Professor, so
Yeah,
me being in the reserves, there's going to be a couple of days that I might miss out. I'm going to look at my schedule. They already, I think, sent it out for this fiscal year.
uh-huh.
So I'll send you that in email. Just hopefully there's no days that I miss,
What branch are you in?
if anything. But I'll give you enough notice so if I got to either take something early or there's no way for me to take it early, do it maybe a day late or something.
Okay, what branch are you in?
All right. Thank you, Professor.
What branch?
Oh, the Marine Corps.
Marine Corps? Nah, you
I
can't
wanted
take
Air
any day.
Force. I wanted Air Force. But,
No, I was
my
Navy
brother-
and I was
so-
Navy
so
and
this
Army,
is-
so
Oh yeah, Army
Yeah.
would have been good too, or Navy actually. But my brother joined a little bit before me, so he kind of influenced my decision. I was just like, I can't do something less tough than he did. So I was like,
yeah, I'm with you. But no, I have a high appreciation for the military as a whole because I did 22 years, so I fully understand that there are days that you can't be here. It's not something that you get a choice in, so we'll work around it.
okay, all right, thank you, Professor. Bye.
Hey, take care.
Professor,
Yes.
I just wanted to touch base with you because I sent you my MOA last week. I just wanted to make sure that you received it.
I don't have the list in front of me, but if you send it to me, please pronounce your name for me, please.
My name is Saja.
Saja. So Saja, I will look, and matter of fact, I'll make a note. I'll send you a note either way and say, yes, I do have it, or no, I haven't received it, but I'll send you something so that'll put your mind at ease.
Okay, I can re-forward it to you if you would like, if that helps you, because I know you get tons of emails.
Oh, no, but what I do is on Friday, since I don't have any classes on Friday, I catch up with everything. So
Okay.
if it's in there, I'm sure I have it, but I will let you know either way. So you'll be okay.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. All right,
Have a
take
good
care.
rest of the day.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
So I have one question, Professor.
Yeah.
So for the assignment, like, do we have to write like like a 2 paragraph, 3 paragraph, or like 1 page, 2 page, like
2 pages. It's minimally 2 pages.
2 pages?
Hmm.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
All right, take care.
Um,
Yep, I'm here.
the 2 pages that he was talking was that about the assignment that you put?
Yeah, yeah, all of the assignments are at least 2 pages in length.
Oh, 2 pages?
Yeah.
Okay. Cause I turned in mine, and I think, and I want to do it again.
Okay, well, I haven't graded it yet, so you can actually go in and resubmit.
Okay. And for the end of the semester,
Mhm.
do we have to do an assignment, like a writing
Yeah,
assignment?
but I haven't issued what that paper is going to be yet because I want to see how far we are in the chapters.
Oh,
So probably around the middle of the semester, I'll probably give like 2 or 3 topics and allow you to choose one to write about. Because what I don't want to do is give it now, and then people start writing it. What I would like for you guys to do is to apply a lot of the
yeah.
concepts that we're talking about in class. So I think if I wait until about then, you'll have a better idea of how to write it and maybe what to write about.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'll make sure you have more than enough. You'll have, a month or more to write the final paper. So you'll have enough time.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good evening.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.